Right. Well, hello. Thank you, everybody, for making to my session today. I know there's a lot of competition and interesting sessions, not to mention a great pool outside. So thank you so much for being here. We're going to talk about failover, when to do it on a CDN, when not to do it, why not to do it, and some use cases, some good and bad ideas. So I think the mandatory slide, everybody has to have a slide about themselves. So that's me. I'm part of a global consulting team. I'm an enterprise architect in the Cambridge office. And my role is to work with customers into improving their web performance stands, finding solution to complex problem, and basically doing what it's not supposed to do. But we do it great. This is my 5th time in Edge. So I've been in area before. This is my 2nd time here. It's a great hotel. Even better was in Miami, so if you miss Miami, we did it twice there, and that was a really fun one. And I was in Boston, and as you can see, the picture in Boston is from inside because, well, it wasn't sunny and pretty like here. So just to start and break the ice, I want to make this session interactive, so if you want to contribute, if you have a question, just raise your hand and jump in. And let's start with this. So can anybody tell me what is this? Yeah, that was my first impression when I saw it the first time too. So this is an oxygen tank. So this is what miners use when they go down 5 miles into the ground. It's a very risky situation. And they know at any time something can go wrong. And that's why they carry these heavy things, right? It's not that they have fun carrying it out, but it saves lives. So in the same way that they acknowledge that they are at risk, there's a problem, and let's be honest, they're talking about their life. It's not like us that we're talking about a site where performance, revenue, all of that is great. They're talking about their life. So if they acknowledge the risk, why not us? And the truth is that by failing to prepare, we are preparing to fail. And that's kind of the motto of this presentation. And we have to talk about risk, we have to talk about issues, and we have to have and a strategy on how to address those. So just to level set, what is a risk? Well, risk is actually mathematics. It's the probability of something adverse to happen and the impact of that. So it's a number. So most of us in the audience come from a math background or take calculus classes. So it's all about probabilities. And there's different ways to mitigate this risk. So risk mitigation is basically, what do I do with this? If the risk is high, you probably take one strategy. If it's low, then you probably try to do something different. And the 4 options I have on the screen is, you can avoid the risk. This is the most expensive one because you basically cover all your bases and you eliminate the risk completely. It's great if you can, but there'll always be something you miss. So at the end, you will have to keep patching and have to keep investing. And when we're talking about cost, we're also talking about that cost of maintenance and doing tests to keep everything. So most of the people actually limit that risk. So how they can reduce the probability of that to happen. Risk transference, on the other hand, is, well, get a third party, get a consultant company, get somebody to handle it. So then it's not your risk anymore. You just give it to somebody else. And finally, risk acceptance. Well, it all depends. If your site is this, then I am cat. I love the site, it's really good. But if you're down, it's not the end of the war. So then at that point, risk acceptance is a good strategy. If I'm down, well, I just wait until they stop attacking me and bring my site back up, or it's not a big deal. The final element here is when we are talking about mitigating that risk and creating a strategy, we have to evaluate the cost of that risk, and it has to be smaller than the cost of failure. So if you invest $1 million in infrastructure to prevent something to happen that will cost you $10,000, then it's better just to lose those $10,000. And when I'm talking about cost, remember, it's not just infrastructure, or it's not just IT, it's not auto-scaling and all of that. It's also people. So the most expensive thing is development and maintenance, because you have to go back and make sure it's working. Well, how does this fit with DevOps? Because that's a big part of the conference, and we're talking about DevOps everywhere. If you're in a DevOps organization, you're already monitoring everything. So you are monitoring your error. That gives you visibility into your risk. So why not automate that error handling or error issue if you have the information available? And it's really important when we are talking about risk mitigation with management. In this room, we can talk from the IT perspective and risk and failover. But when you're talking with management, try to put it as continuous or constant availability instead of disaster recovery. Because when you talk with disaster recovery or risk management, that has a bad connotation. It's like, oh, are you saying we're going down? So you mean that all my investment is at risk because you are afraid of something going down? But if you talk about constant availability, it has different connotation. So for example, if you say we are 3 nines available, so that's great, that's a good number. A lot of people are looking for that metric, but that means you are down for almost 9 hours a year. So what happened during those 9 hours? Are you losing revenue? Are you losing conversion? Are you losing advertising? Are you losing, what's the impact of that? So if you go to management and say, oh, we want to create a strategy and spend a lot of resources in disaster recovery, that's basically maintaining continuity during an outrage, they will say, no, we have to focus on something that generates revenue. If you tell them, oh, we want to add another 9 to that availability, they will probably have budget for you. So just keep that in mind. Now, I will assume everybody knows what a CDN is in this class. So let's explain what failover is in my particular case. So failover is to serve an alternate response when alternate response to an error condition. Alternate response could be a redirect, could be a static object, could be a different page, could be retries. It's basically taking an action. And error condition, it's almost anything you can match on. So it could be an HTTP status code that is an error, it could be a connection timeout, or it can also be a condition or characteristic of the device. So for example, a bot. So if you get a request for a bot to a page they shouldn't have access to, you can actually trigger an alternate response and give them an error. So it's not that you are failing, but you are matching on that condition that is a bot and taking an action. So in this particular case, for example, let's say you have Godzilla. So Godzilla attack you, everything is down, you cannot connect to your origin, all the requests are going down. So if you implement failover, what you will do is go to net storage, or your cloud storage of preference, and serve a plan B response. In this case, it's a mobile device, it's a mobile app, so it's an API request. You serve a JSON object. And this is really important. Serve a response that is meaningful for the client. For example, we have an implementation 4 weeks ago. We have WAF enabled, and we were denying certain valid requests for clients. But then the clients were making API requests, and what they got was a page. Well, they collapsed. They didn't know what to do with that. They're expecting a JSON response. They get an HTML page, and then they throw a different error, and the whole application collapsed. So what we did is to implement failover and send something like this, empty JSON or error response, and then the app can recover. So this is actually a good implementation. So let's talk about why this is good and some other good examples. So this is good because you are capturing an error condition you don't see at the origin. And this is really important. You don't see network errors. You don't see connections timeout. You probably don't see SSL handshake errors, but the CDN, Akamai sees it. So how much would you pay for an error you cannot detect? How much you pay for a good that you cannot find? Probably a lot of money if you're in the desert and you need water, and you'll pay like 5-6 times what it normally a bottle of water would cost. Good thing, it's actually included in your service. So if you're using IOM, DSA, or basically almost a web delivery product, it's included. So I'm not selling you something expensive. It's just something you already have, so why not taking advantage of it? And finally, we already talked about the friendly message to the client. Another good use case, IoT devices. So the problem with IoT devices is they are low-power devices, closed box. You don't control the ecosystem, and a lot of times you just ship it, and they will keep the same software or the same version forever. So what happens if you send the wrong error response? This is actually my home. I got this error, and my thermostat was logged for the whole day. I have to wait until I got home, I uninstalled the app, I have to unplug for the Wi-Fi, do a bunch of things. And what happened is I made a request, something happened along the way, and the error response was most likely formatted in something they could understand. So the thermostat just crashed. That's something you want with your app. So for example, if you're delivering to an app, to an IoT device, send a JSON, an XML, whatever is expecting the right error response. And very important, in Akamai, you can set your read and connection timeout. Because if you're talking about a device, a connected car or whatever IoT, if you don't get a response in 20 seconds, 30 seconds, it's too late. You probably move on, and you cannot wait for a minute. So you can set it to something really low because you're expecting a quick response. And if you don't get a response, you can retry. You can serve the default page. Now, I prepare a case study. This is probably where I will spend more time on the presentation. But how do you handle a disaster recovery scenario on your CDN, on Akamai? For those of you that doesn't know what a pilot light is a strategy to maintain continuity on your business. It's like when you have a gas stove and you have these lights turned on all the time, but then suddenly when you want to cook, you turn it on and you create the flame. So it's the same idea. You have a small version of your infrastructure just waiting when you need it. And when you need it, you scale it up. And then after you scale it up, you send all the traffic there. So what are the problems with this approach? It's really good because you have a copy of your infrastructure, so it's the same that you're currently using, but then you need to shift traffic. Most of the time, shifting traffic is using DNS. DNS have latency. It's just, if you have a TTL, you just have to wait. You cannot hurry more than the TTL on your DNS. So that's the time to shift, take it to shift the location. Scaling, let's say you're using Amazon and you have everything set up to auto scale. That still takes minutes because you need to take your data, you need to process, you need to create new instances. So it could take from seconds to minutes depending on how big your infrastructure is. And it's error prone. We are humans. During a disaster, if you have Godzilla, you're probably watching the news. You're worried about what's going on outside, but at the same time, you're trying to save your business. It's very likely that you will push the ground bottom, you will miss zero, or just make a mistake because you're in a very stressful situation. So you try to automate that. And thinking that on mind, I create this example. So I have a just dumb, whatever origin, or it's not dumb, but just a simple origin. So let's say you have a load balancer, you have Nginx on microservices, and you're using MySQL or some other database. So that's your bare bones, and you're using Akamai. And then your disaster recovery it could be in the cloud. Why in the cloud? Well, because if you're doing pilot light, you want something that can scale up. You don't want to build something huge if you're not going to use it every day. So the cloud is a very good example. And I'm using EC2 instances without scaling. The elastic load balancer, and when they normally start scaling when you get traffic. So if you don't get traffic ever, then probably will take a few minutes, or you need to contact Amazon to get to the level you need. But it's just a basic infrastructure as well. So in time of peace, when you get a user, that goes to the CDN. And then I'm introducing a couple of artifacts. The first one is the phase release cloudlet. Phase release just decide which origin to go. I really like phase release because you can make changes instantaneously. You can control it with APIs. So if I decide to make a change right now, I just submit an API. I could do it from my phone, and then I shift the traffic or the split whatever I want in like now. The next artifact is visitor prioritization. And this controls how much traffic I'm sending to the origin. So visitor prioritization is a tool that let me send some of the traffic to a waiting room in case I cannot handle the load. So I put these two artifacts in the middle before going to my origin. So again, time of peace, 100% of the traffic goes there. So what happens when we get another request coming in, and you're going to send it to the origin, and again, we have Godzilla. So when you get Godzilla, everything is on fire, you cannot connect to your database, he may crash your data center because that's what Godzilla does. And what do? You go to net storage, as we showed before, and you serve this waiting room page to the client. And you can automate that so that's instantaneously. Now, what do you do for disaster recovery? You probably have to get your last known copy of your database and move it to your cloud, because that's your user data. Those are your transactions. That's your business that you have to keep continuity. That can take some time. You are scaling. And maybe you have to contact somebody on high upper management to approve the move to the cloud. So while all of that is happening, you can serve this waiting room page. And once you start sending traffic, you don't start sending 100%. Why not? What happens if you move all your traffic and you haven't scaled yet? You overload the infrastructure and it goes down as well. So now you have your real infrastructure down and your disaster recovery infrastructure down. So you start slowly. So in this case, I'm sending the blue user. So why the blue user? Because he was shopping before, or so he was making an interaction on my site. So he's very likely to convert. User in black, he hasn't come to the site yet, so I don't know if he will convert or no. So I can decide with visitor prioritization, who am I sending? So again, high level, phase release is actually doing the shift between the disaster recovery and the origin location, and visitor prioritization is controlling how much traffic I can send. So this is a simple way that Akamai or your CDN can help you in time of crisis. The final good example is bot management, for example. So again, think on Akamai as a proxy. So if you get a request, and there's a lot of valid use cases why you want to serve an alternate response to an user. But if you think on Akamai as a proxy, we're closer to the user, we can detect it. So if you have a single page app and you need to send a pre-rendered version of that page, you can move that logic to the edge. If it's a malicious bot and you just want to deny the request, we are closer to that bot. We can absorb that traffic for you. But then the question is, should you do it? It comes down to cost. So again, we talk about probabilities, we talk about money. So is the CDN better than you matching on bots? Do they know something you don't? Maybe yes, maybe not. Maybe you already have a regex or something you want to move to the CDN and they can support it. So that's an easy use case. The expensive use case is if you want to classify bots. So for example, Akamai have bot manager. I can tell you, oh, this is a bad bot, a good bot, give information about this, the characteristic of the bot, and you can take different decisions. But again, if your site is Nyan Cat, do you really care if you get a false negative and some bot comes in? Not much. So it all comes down to what's your use case, what you want to do, can you do it on the CDN? And with that, we can move into the please don't do this. These are the bad ideas. And you will know in the presentation, the bad ideas have that little guy on the top. So don't electrocute yourself. If you see that green guy, that means please don't do this. The first one is don't try to use your Akamai to match on error conditions in your infrastructure. We are on a different level, and we don't see it. So for example, this response, this might be a 200 response, but it's an error connecting to the database. You don't want to expose that to the client. Or this is actually me. This is a site I visit often, and I got this error. So for my client, for my phone, for Akamai, this was a 200 response. Everything looks good. But there was an application error somehow that is exposing some of the code. So Akamai is not a good use case for this specific failover because it's on a different layer. So the best practice is monitor your infrastructure, monitor these kind of errors, your database, because that's something you have better visibility than us. Another one, if you're making a transaction. So if it's in the process of paying for something, completing a banking transaction, and it's a post request, what is the risk of doing failover there? So first, it could be that the transaction actually goes through, and then we detect an error and do fail action and try the transaction again. So then you are charging them twice, so good for you, bad for him. But that has a lot of penalties and things that you don't want to get into. So don't get to yourself. Don't do failover in these cases. Control it at the client. So if you get, you can say, well, if connection timeout, you serve an error to the client, and then they can decide if they want to post it again. What some of my customers do is they actually include a transaction number or time it has tried. So for example, if I submit a transaction, I get an error, then the second time I submit a transaction, I include a header or some value on the post body saying, oh, this is the second time I tried. So then when you receive that transaction, they say, oh, this is the second time you tried, let me check if I have your previous transaction or not. And then you can handle that without doing failover on Akamai. I've done this a lot, so I acknowledge infinite failover. So you can cascade down your options. So I had a customer, for example, they have 8 different endpoints in 6 different locations. So what we did is we tried the first location. If it fails, go to the second one, go to the third one, all the way to the last location. And then if that failed, go to net storage. So that's 9 times we retried the request. Each time we retry the request is time. So we have to go back and forth. And what happened is it worked great. We did it. But by the time we get a response, the client moved on. It took like 10 minutes to get a response. So we can do it, but my recommendation is just try 3 or fewer times. And if you have to do more than 2, set timeouts on the second and the third retry so you don't get the client waiting. So this is a little bit more complex. So a lot of you are doing distributed deployment. So now with all the container technology, you probably have different teams, each one with their own pipeline to develop and to release code. Let's say you have continuous deployment, continuous stability, and you have continuous everything. And what happens is each one of these teams will release code at their own will. When they do that, they implement techniques as canary release. So basically, the canary release, again, comes from the mining industry, is you go down inside the mine, you bring a canary with you. They're very sensitive to oxygen changes. So if the canary die, everybody runs out of the mine. So it's the same idea. You deploy code to few servers, you bring a few clients inside. If they die, you probably want to close that version and go back to the stable version. But they're doing this at the container level. That's invisible to Akamai. We cannot see those containers because, again, that's part of your infrastructure. So I have use cases where they want to bring a centralized location to manage that A/B testing, blue-green deployment, canary deployment. And the problem is because that's not exposed to the internet, that means you have to expose it. So that's risk, not a good idea. You don't want to expose internal infrastructure if you don't have to. Then you have to start managing each one of the teams with a different cookie or some other technology, and it just go mad. And believe me, it will scale out of hand quickly. So it's not a good idea. And what happened with the developer? They will try once. Next time, they will come back to do it at the container level. So summary is infrastructure. Keep it inside the infrastructure. So yeah, the best practice is just control that release inside your own container.
You just mentioned the blue-green deployment, and I think phase release is a cloud list specifically for blue-green. My question is that if we don't have that cloudlet, and if you just have got the Akamai GTM, what are the disadvantages of doing blue-green deployment using just the Akamai GTM and being able to send weighted distribution across 2 releases? Is that going to be very painful in a route that should be avoided, or is it still manageable and doable?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is, how can I use phase release for blue-green deployment? It's a formal product for that use case. If you don't have it, but you have GTM, is that still a good use case, and can you move with it? So a couple of things. First, that's a good idea, because if you have two complete different environments and you're doing a release, like a formal release, not a container release, then it makes sense. You can control it at the CDN. Phase release is instantaneous. So when you make a change, it happens right away. GTM is a DNS-based solution, so there's still propagation time. If you don't care about the propagation time, then that's good.
Able to control it manually, but then the thing is that when you have got a weighted distribution, and let's say that you start doing 90-10, right? And if things go south with the new thing, then how much time would it take for us to do 100-0, whereby you divert 100% of the traffic onto the old release? Using DNS may become a challenge, but if you're ready to do a manual failover, would that still be a problem is the fundamental question.
Yeah, so in that case, yes, because GTM is 7 minutes to propagate, yes, plus whatever DNS record you have.
Correct.
If you killed your test object on DNS, you say, oh, this version we put 10%, it's bad, you can kill your test object and it will propagate in about 30 seconds and bring all the traffic back. So you can orchestrate that. It's more complex because you have more moving pieces. Few things to consider. GTM is at the DNS level, so the split is by DNS resolver, so it's not going to be user specific.
But TTL is in your control. The TTL?
The TTL is in your control.
So you can reduce it or use it as you like?
Yeah, so if you want 10%, but then you get 10% of the resolver, and that's 20% of the traffic because bad luck, yeah, you can reduce that to 5% and start playing around, but it's only percentage based. Phase release, you can select the users. So for example, I have a customer that released a new version of the website and they release it only in California. That was their target market. You cannot do that at the DNS level, but it could be, but yeah. And then the resolver is somewhere else. In this case, you get the request from the client and you can say, oh, I know you're on California, I'll send you to the new version. So you have more flexibility and options in what to do. And again, the kill switch is an API call and you revert back. So you can do it with GTM. It depends on your use case. If you're going to focus only on split, or if you want to do something more complex and more flexible.
You can do the by the request type also. Something like
yeah, you can say, oh, you are mobile, then I'll send you to the new experience. Or you can say, oh, you have this cookie, I'll send you to this experience. So you can actually play around and get people to subscribe to your beta channel. And then you give them a cookie, and when you're going to release something new, you see that cookie, and those are the ones you will send to your canary deployment or green deployment.
And so the new cloudlet that I've come across is the load balancer. I think is one of the newest cloudlets, and that takes the approach more. I mean, takes the value add that the load balancer provides over phase release is primarily what is that you're able to even do a binder control and able to load balance across multiple data centers and not primarily for you just doing a blue-green deployment, correct?
Yeah, with phase release, you can have multiple origins. I have them 4 origins, and hot and hot cold between those 4. So you can have more than 2. Application load balancer brings more options in what to match and what to do, and it leverages GTM as well. So propagation and application load balance is a little bit slower, but then you have more use cases, and you can target, I think you can target the population after you do the split.
But isn't it a good idea to keep the load balancer next to the application stack? Because use AWS load balancer, but use the phase cloudlet to match the traffic.
That may be a
Latency.
problem, right? Because the reason it makes more sense to use a load balancer at the afterline is when you have got an application running in the data center and part of it running in the cloud. So when you are in a hybrid environment, then it makes a lot of sense to have the load balancer in the CDN. But I think what you were saying is that if your entire application footprint is in the cloud, then I think it makes more sense to have a load balancer in AWS using ELB. I think what you're talking about.
Yeah, and
There's use cases. I mean, there's a use case for different kinds of problem or context that you're in.
exactly, and everything will have a pros and cons depending on what you're seeing. And
Origins are still on-prem for some companies.
yeah.
Companies have moved to the cloud.
And
Happen at NIPEC
And a good point, I was going to mention this in the final remarks, but if you have this infrastructure, for example, that thing on the top, your pilot light, that's a minimum viable solution. So that's your MVP right there. So if you go to your business partner and say, oh, we're going to get an MVP and eventually migrate to the cloud or have a second location, that would be a better discussion than say, oh, we just want to have AWS running in parallel because it's cool. So yeah, that's a great point. So a couple more of bad ideas. I've seen this with Lambda. It's actually something you can also do with Akamai. You can create support tickets using the APIs. When you talk about fail action, your action could be create a ticket, make an API request and create a ticket, right? So I've seen it in Amazon. I haven't seen anybody doing it on Akamai yet. Please don't do it. But if you get an error of 500, you can actually go and create a ticket with Seeker, give it high visibility, high risk. And so if you are under attack, then you create 1 million tickets per second. And not a good idea, because that will escalate to your management. You will wake him up on Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening, and it just go out of hand. So proactive monitoring is good. Knowing that these things exist is good, but please don't attack us creating tickets. And I think we're working on closing this loop, so you cannot do it. The final one, and this is just a good recommendation. When you are doing a failover page, don't do something generic. So from your side, if the client sees this and calls you, what do? Or a 500, what do you do? There's no information. You don't know what's going on. So it's bad for you because there's no error information, and you have to go back to your logs at what time was it. So not very helpful. So you can do something like this. And Akamai have their own page. So this is good for you because you tell the client, oh, copy that error code, send it to me, and then you get your own logs. Is it good for a client? No, I think this is a .NET error, so but Akamai have a similar one that is just a string. Yeah.
So what is the error message? I've seen it sometimes on have it, and how long is it valid for? Because I think maybe after a few hours.
Yeah, not long. I don't know exactly the timeline, but if you need to troubleshoot, it's better to go as soon as possible. Maximum will be 3 days, but I think it's more like in the minutes or hours range that we can find out.
Because sometimes we'll get a client that calls us to say that there's an issue. They don't call us directly, they call the help desk. Then when the help desk sends the information over, it might be a day later. And when we try to troubleshoot this, then it is about that.
It has
So
happened to us also, but I think then they have to ask the customer again to try.
Yeah, and it might not happen. So what a lot of my customers are doing is when they get an error, they take that error and also include on the query string some information. So you have the Akamai error code, but you also record the time. You record, for example, what kind of error. So if we see as a 500, we can save that. So even if the string is not valid on Akamai anymore and you cannot troubleshoot, you can include the information you want.
So basically, if the CDN are velocity says it has expired, can we get Akamai to look into it? You guys see on reference of it, or it's gone, so they have to be created?
Yeah, so we can use that reference, as you say, for a short period of time. So what I'm recommending is you actually do something branded. So, and when you do something branded, you can also include information that will help you troubleshoot. So it's not just the Akamai error code, we can keep that, but then you also add your own error characteristic. So you say, oh, error 1 to 3, and you know, oh, you were on the store page or the news page, and that will give information as well. So as soon as somebody called you, you take the URL, and the query string, there are some parameters useful for you, and you can start troubleshooting. And the good thing about, I was saying this is not good for a client because, well, they don't know what to do with that error. And especially, you are losing business because they don't know what to do. The only thing they can do is go back. So why not include a search page? Why not include your menu? And actually, that's what I'm recommending on the next slide. Just make that page to be branded and be your own. So if I get an error, oh, I was shopping for shoes, I get this error page, I just type on the search shoes and move on. So they will probably not even call you. Not good for you because you cannot troubleshoot, but you don't lose that interaction. Yes?
Just so that I get this part, so when you are, when client sees that error page that has got the ACA reference number to it, you're saying that it's not a good practice to show that page because there's nothing that, I mean, the customer is totally out of the navigation of your site at that point in time. So you're saying that have a branded page being served so that he can go back to the home page or whatever, wherever he started from. That page is coming from net storage then? I mean, is that page posted on net storage for Akamai to serve? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So where do you configure on Property Manager to say that, okay, whenever Akamai is about to throw a page that has going to have a reference ID, go and serve the branded page?
Yeah, so we serve that reference ID error if we get a 5XS response, if we get a connection timeout response from the origin. So basically, if we cannot reach you or we get an error condition from you. So you can do a match on those error conditions and then trigger the failover feature. And then your failover action is go to net storage and fetch the page.
But then there are other cases in which I have seen, and I've seen in cases when the parent configuration not able to talk to the child configuration because there was a SSL handshake failure at that
Oh, you got one of those, yeah.
Yes. So in that case, right, you don't have the 500 or 400. It was something that, granted, the configuration should have been right, but what happened in our case, right, was that the certificate had been rotated because it was Akamai managed certificate, and on the parent configuration, it did not happen, and the handshake was failing, and we kept on getting the reference ID. So how do you go and make sure that the customer still does not see that by client page?
That's a great point. So what happens is when you have client child to parent communication on Akamai, that's also over HTTP. So when we cannot do the handshake, that trigger an internal 5XX inside Akamai.
Okay, I thought that was HTTPS in our case because it's all HTTPS.
It's all HTTPS, yeah, but it goes to the parent, cannot do the handshake, so then the client will formulate its own, so the client in this case is the Akamai Edge.
So I get your point.
So if you do a match on 5XX, it will catch it.
Okay, got it.
And then you go to net storage, but when you go to net storage, you can actually include the reference number, the error ID, so you can display it on the page, you can put it on the body of the page hidden, or you can put it as a query string, so then you don't lose that reference if you want to troubleshoot.
Right. And so when you put it in the query string, it's also going to be put into the Akamai log, so you can reference that also.
Exactly, so you say, oh, we got this error, then you look at the logs, and then you have all the information there, and you can include information useful for you, as we were talking before. If it's on this group of pages, it's say it's error code 1, and give you information on what's going on. Yeah, so that's a great idea. So summary, if there's an error, if you're doing failover, keep the error condition because it helps you troubleshoot, but serve a branded page with your navigation and everything. So the customer, they will probably not even call you because they can navigate and go somewhere else, but you can still look into the logs and find it. So to close it up, it's a good idea when it's a network type of error because a CDN lives on the network, so we can see errors you can't, so that's a good idea. And they will publish the slide later. Null potent request, so request that doesn't change. So if the response will always be the same, if you are not changing the status of the server, basically most of the GET requests, do failover. It's very easy. And also, if you feel that the Akamai or the CDN have improved efficiency, the case of the bot match, for example, and you can move it up the stack and not worry about that. So then you're moving the risk and the processing and all of that to the CDN. When it's not a good idea, infrastructure, because we don't have visibility into your infrastructure, so please keep tabs into what's going on in your site. I do have customers that call us for every single error, and then if we don't find anything bad on Akamai, then they go and troubleshoot on their side. It's a process that works for them, but it consumes a lot of time. When the request is not in the bottom, pause, put, delete, because that means it will change something on the server. So you don't want to delete twice, you don't want to pause a transaction twice. When the cost of the operational is higher than the cost of the failure. So I did a really complex failover infrastructure where we were reading the response body from the origin and doing something crazy, and we have like 7 trees to handle it. It was great. It took me about 100 hours to implement it, and then it was like 20 hours a month on maintenance. So it was a lot of money for, probably that failure will have cost them a couple of bucks every time it fails, right? So when you talk with Akamai and they say, we could do it, but it's not a good idea, just listen to us, because then the cost will translate probably in maintenance. So final remarks, and again, talk about risk mitigation. You are at risk, so it's good that you have that conversation. You have to acknowledge. Akamai is just another tool on your kit. Failover is not the answer to everything, but it can help you, and it's a low-cost option. So you have it included on your contract, so why not take advantage? And again, talk about constant availability, because that's easier to move up the stack and get approval for what you want to do. And we talked about a pilot light environment to be an MVP, minimum viable product. So if you're going to migrate to the cloud, that's an easy way to get failover, to integrate with the CDN, and also start moving to the cloud. So that was it. Any questions or comments?
For the failover between the CDN and then your origin, how about if you wanted to, using your GTM or this phase cloudlet, could you do between different regions with different CDN vendors?
Yes.
That option.
Yeah, so the question is, can you fail over to
another vendor and then route only China traffic to them, and still all the word is Akamai?
Yeah, so the question is, can you fail over to a different CDN? Yes, you could, but that means you will probably pay both CDN for that request. Yeah. Because you get Akamai, Akamai couldn't reach the origin for some reason, so then it say, okay, fail over to another CDN, and they will charge you for that traffic again. You could also pass information to the client. I don't know your use case, but if it's an API or some client you can control, or you can redirect them to a different domain, then you do that and send it to the other CDN, so you don't have to pay the hit twice.
Origin could be down for some other reason or long time.
Yeah, and a server could go rogue every now and then. That's a good question. There's an option for cacheable content, serve stale if unable to reach the origin. So if we have it in cache, we will serve that version. If you enable failover on top of that, it will say, if you have it in cache, you serve from cache. If I don't have it in cache, I trigger my failover scenario.
But that's only for cacheable
content.
You can't do that for dynamic pages.
Exactly. So if you're caching pages, you could do it. Or if it's an image, you could do it. But if it's something dynamic that you wanted to process at the origin, maybe not. But yeah, that's a good observation. All right, so I'll be around today and tomorrow. So if you have any other question or want to sit and talk with me, I'm always available, and I'll be doing some of the labs, so you can find me later. So again, thank you so much for coming today and listen to me. I think there's a survey on the app, so please give me your feedback, good or bad, because that's the only way I can improve. All right, thank you.